We are talking about the anniversary of Keith Memorial United Methodist Church. Really, the church has 3 anniversaries. We will celebrate the 175th anniversary in the month of September, and we are glad to do it. But it actually could be a triple celebration if we were so inclined. It is also the 60th anniversary of Keith Church, because you see that during the War of the States, the people called Methodists had some troublesome years, and they were divided in not their spiritual life to God and to their love for the church, but to their philosophy of government. And we had the M.E. Church and the M.E. Church South. Keith was in the latter. Then when came the unification, and the people called Methodist decided again that it would be the Methodist Church, 1939, then we needed a name. And our pastor at that time, Reverend Robert E. Regan, Reverend Regan was instrumental in getting us to name which had been a unit of the M.E. Church South to become Keith Memorial Methodist Church. You see, the united word was added into it later. Then, as I have said, we could have had the 3rd anniversary if we wanted to. We came to the sanctuary of the first unit of this church, then 50 years. And so you see, really, celebrations of anniversaries at Keith Memorial United Methodist Church actually covers 3 anniversaries, 175th, 60th, and the 50th.
It's been a privilege for me to be able to serve in the role of pastor and encourage and coach and perhaps help to find ways that people can serve and be in ministry. I hope that as we look toward our future, we can keep in mind our heritage and our past, that we can build on who we are as United Methodists. The United Methodist Church has as its mission to make disciples for Jesus Christ. And our local congregation has a mission statement that says we are to be a nurturing congregation, growing in faith and discipleship and reaching out to others in service and love for Christ.
No one could be happier than a great-grandfather on an occasion like this. I'm Bill Sullins. Next to me is son Dave. Next to him is his son, Trey, and Trey's son, Timothy. And on the end over there is Trey's brother, another son, my grandson, Stuart. This is a wonderful occasion for the family. Nathan Sullins, with part of his family, moved from Loudon, where they were living, to an area 2 miles west of Athens on the Rocky Mountain Road. This was a period of time when this was Indian country, and the Hiwassee Land Grant had just been created in the government as an opportunity for people to move in. He bought 160 acres of land out in that area. In 1821, and let's go back to that period of time. There were no church buildings, certainly not Keith Church, nor anything. There's a little lodge built about this time at Cedar Springs, and most of the camp meetings were held around Cedar Springs. My great-grandfather found that when he had enough to where he could build his house, he built in the lower level a kind of a room large enough that would hold some people. He was not a very religious man, Nathan wasn't, but Rebecca, his wife, was. She was known as the praying woman in the area. I guess it was through her influence that they built this building for worship services, and that's where they were held when they didn't have the camp meetings. Let's go to the camp meetings just a minute. It was not uncommon here. We had them other places in the county. 3 denominations, the Methodist, Presbyterian, and the Baptist. And they were in that order with the number of people participating in them. And it wasn't uncommon just to hear, it was over the conference. And when a presiding elder came, he was taken over as by the itinerant ministers as they did their pack riding from place to place. But they built like cabins, tents, as they brought them, and they would have for a week, 2 or 3 weeks time, with 2,000 to 3,000 people coming for a camp meeting. I'd like to say this about Keith Church and the Keith family. Mrs. Keith and Marshall Keith brought slaves that they had at this period of time, and they built out of the brick that they made off of the Keith property, and they built Keith Church. My great-grandfather was one of the first. I don't think he was the first, but around the first to be baptized in Keith Memorial Church in the mid-1800s. He was an unusual man. Converted somewhere around 12 years old. He says probably before that, but until he got 12 to know just what he was thinking, he felt that was his conversion period. And he was an author. He was quite an orator. He was a singer. He liked to write. I have a copy here of the book that I treasure. It's Recollections of an Old Man. He was involved in schools. He was president of the Martha Washington Inn in Abingdon, Virginia, as when it was a girls' school. As I said, he was president of Henry College. He created Sullins College, which again was a girls' school at Bristol. And the last involvement he was in schools was in Centenary College in Cleveland, Tennessee. My mother went to school at Centenary College. She lived in Cleveland, Mary Horner. He was a very great man of God. I treasure a book, and I treasure being a grandson of David Sullins.
Alexander Hume Keith married Sarah Ann Penelope Fore. Sarah Ann Penelope's father, Dr. Augustine Fore, came early to McMinn County and bought a great deal of property. He was a doctor. I think he had come from Kentucky, and his wife, Nancy Pugh, came with him. Their daughter, Sarah Ann Penelope, who was born here, married Alexander Hume Keith, and they had a reasonably large family. They built the Keith house, which is very close to here, in 1856 or 1857, something of that sort, because the house in which they were living burned. The Fores were Methodists, and consequently they had a great interest in our church. They were interested in the first church we had, which was downtown Athens, on the site of the church which burned. They had always been active there and very supportive of it. And this Sarah Ann Penelope IV Keith became known among those who came later as Old Mrs. Keith. Well, this Mrs. Keith, Sarah Ann Penelope, had also been interested enough to give the church a piece of property on which they built the first parsonage that we had owned. And I think maybe she did that as a relief to herself because she had been so generous, and when the ministers didn't have a home, well, she would let them live in her house. And so much to the extent that one of them married one of her daughters. So maybe it was a good idea for her to give them a parsonage and get them out of the house. One of her daughters married a man named J.B. Frazier, who later became Governor Frazier of the state of Tennessee. Alexander Keith, and this was Alexander Marshall Keith, eventually inherited the house, and he and his wife, who was Alice McGuire from Louisiana, had their oldest child was Marshall Keith, and then their second child was Alexander Keith, and their third child was Catherine Douglas Keith. And those were the people who lived in the house. And eventually Alexander married and moved to California, and Marshall married and lived here in Athens, Tennessee. And Catherine never married, but they had no children. So at Catherine's death and at Marshall's widow's death, the house was sold, and it is no longer in the family. Miss Catherine, even at her death, had left a nice sum of money to our church, which we continue to enjoy using the income from it. The windows here in the church are a gift of the Keith family. Prior to that, the various members of the Keith family had given us benches when we were selling pews in the church and the various pieces of furniture up here in the sanctuary. They have all supported it through the years. Mrs. Keith lived to a ripe old age. It seems to me she was 90. I think she died in 1913. And it's interesting to note, my family too has been very active in the church. My great-grandparents married in 1833, and they came from Virginia to Athens, Tennessee on their honeymoon, and they stayed. And I know my great-grandfather was a trustee of the church in 1842, but they became members very soon after they arrived in Athens because they had been Lutherans, and there were no Lutheran churches in the county at that time. And consequently, there are those of us who are the great-grandchildren who have been active, and our parents have been active, and our great-grandparents. My mother and Miss Catherine Keith both joined the church on the same Sunday in 1913, and at the time they died, they were both the oldest members of the church in length of time. And I think both had always been very active in the church. The railing that we have here in front of it, these are pieces that came out of the Keith house when they remodeled it in the 30s. The banisters were on the top and the bottom of the front porch at the Keith house, and they're poplar, I believe, but they were able to have them scraped and incorporate them into our railing here in front, and it's very much a part of the church. We had a celebrity, a movie star in our church named Peggy Varnado, whose professional name was Peggy Dow, and when Peggy married, it was the largest wedding we've ever had in the church. It really was standing room only. But they persuaded the board of our church to split the rail right down the center so we have two pieces now. And we could move it to the right and to the left. Before, if we had a wedding, they had to walk all the way around the railing and up. And when we had a funeral, if we wanted to push this back, it had to be moved, and it was very bunglesome. But I think it's been much improved since we have changed it. Miss Catherine Keith gave us these lovely stained glass windows in 1973. Some to family members and some with Bible verses, but Miss Catherine herself died in 1985, and after that the board agreed that we should dedicate one of these windows to Miss Catherine. So you see we have here Catherine Douglas Keith, 1896-1985. We moved out to the Keith house, which was originally known as Forest Lawn, and we know today as Wood Lawn. And we were talking about the ministers who spent so much of their time out here actually living here at the house. And as they called it, the preacher's room was the room upstairs on the left. And then across the hall, the room on the right was Miss Catherine's room. And Mr. and Mrs. Keith lived downstairs in the back bedroom. It was the back bedroom on the left. We were talking earlier about the spindles in the altar in our sanctuary. There were some left over, and they are, of course, still in the house. You see them on the balcony up here, and there's some in a back porch. But you recognize them now as the same spindles.
The church, a beautiful historic structure, marveled at with its gorgeous stained glass windows, the heart of pine interior, the bricks that were made to withstand whatever came unless it was an act of providence, and a slate roof. It was a structure to behold of beauty and reverence, and it was destroyed by fire.
It happened in the Christmas season of 1947, probably on the 26th. It is thought that maybe Dr. Ed Forey was the one that saw the first fire, because he always went to work early, and his office was right across the street from the church. And for those who don't know where the church was, it was directly across the street from Forey Hospital, and it was one sad sight. It made one glorious fire. The insides were heart pine, and when it got started, it went bluey. It had a slate roof on it, and it was put on with lead head nails, and it sounded like a war going on when those nails started popping and blowing. The Athens Fire Department, the fire department today, I don't think could have stopped that fire. Once it got going, it was going.
Those of us who experienced the burning of that church will never quite get over the trauma of that morning that it burned.
The sad part about this fire, outside of our losing the building, was that the minister who was here at the time, Reverend Dawson, lost everything that he had. All of his books, his library, his papers, which for a minister was terrible.
It has been said through the years that strong men don't cry. Well, let me tell you, there were a lot of strong men became weak men that morning.
It was a sad scene. There were grown men standing in the middle of the street crying. And it still brings back sad times.
Our son David was just a little over 2 and was beginning to talk fairly well. And Uncle Hugh came out to see us quite a lot, and he always knocked at the window because David would run to the window and see who it was. When he knocked at the window that time, David ran to him, and he didn't wait till he came in the house. He said, "Oh, Uncle Hugh, Daddy's and God's church burned up." And we still tell him, about him saying that, but he felt like, and that was where Neil went every time he left the house, except when he went to work, or at least that's what he told me.
But I have said, and I mean it in not a light manner, but really and truly a serious manner. I have said that I do not think that God ever started a fire, but he sure didn't put the one out that destroyed our old structure, because from those ashes we grew into where we are today, and we are on a roll at Keith Memorial United Methodist Church. And I think, as I reminisce and as I look back from the things of it there, that it's almost the tones of the doxology. Praise God from whom all blessings flow.
You know, the members of Keith Church have worked together on any and all projects that's ever been given to them. And back in the early 40s, the women of the church fed the Kiwanis Club. They didn't have a place to meet. And if you remember that we couldn't get much meat, so we fed a lot of macaroni and cheese.
I had the best time. There was Isabel Eves and Gladys Sherritt and
Cheetah Johnson.
Miss Cheetah.
And we made coffee in an old lard can. Of course, the Kiwanis, they drank it, didn't they? They liked it.
But then that was the women of the church. The Young Adult Fellowship then was formed in the early 40s. After we got our Young Adult Fellowship organized, and a lot of churches in the district called and wanted us to come and help them get started with a Young Adult Fellowship. So we went to Cleveland, and we went to Copper Hill, and we went to Sweetwater and Maryville, and went to Trinity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And give a program, and I told them just how we did our programs, and as far as I know, they all started Young Adult Fellowships, and are still going today. We had the Christmas parties in the basement of the church to start with, but then with the underprivileged children, we outgrew the basement and had to move upstairs to have the Christmas parties. And that was when Frank got his Santa Claus suit that he was so proud of.
Well, of course, you know, after the one Christmas party we had, or one time we were delivering the basket, a tragic thing happened. The old church burned. It was a big loss to us. But, you know, the following Sunday, the people of Keith Church were having their worship service in Macmillan County High School in the old building there. You know, the parsonage, the church parsonage that time was right across the street, right over where Don's store is, and Ida Dawson was a pastor's wife, and she let us bring our children over there for a nursery.
Can you imagine anybody with 4 children open their house up for the public to come in after you've got those 4 children ready for Sunday school?
Let me tell you about Ida and Henry Dawson. When he was our pastor, the parsonage was where Don's Food Market is now. If the lights were on in the basement and you were in the living room, you could see the light through the cracks in the floor. But I never heard him complain, or either of his 4 children.
We had a house next to this lot where they were building the church, and it was called the Davis House, but Isabel Eves had lived there before. And we had our Young Adult Fellowship there, and we filled those rooms to capacity. We had Sunday school classes there, and we had Bible school there.
And if you were host at the Young Adult Fellowship, you had to go early because we had no central air and heat. And you had to go and build a fire and all those grates in there. And in the summertime, you went early and raised the windows and hoped a little air would come through. But sometimes in the summertime, we would meet in homes or in the yard, and we had wonderful times meeting there.
We did.
We really had fun, but we also worked real hard at fundraising projects. We sold everything from, girls what?
Well, I know we sold shampoo, Jewel Tea shampoo, to get a coffee urn so we wouldn't have to make coffee in
that old tin can. Lard can.
And that was so easy to sell, and we got this 50 cup coffee urn that we sold enough to get 2. So we have plenty of coffee. We served the Pilot Club 3 years, I know, 75, 76, and 77. We served the Mayfield milk producers.
Yes, we did.
We had to serve them at noon because the men had to milk the cows in the early morning and late afternoon, so they always had their dinner at noon. Athens Hosiery Mill, we served about 500 or 600 people out at the tobacco barn. And Jude and Gene Nankville headed that up, and we served them about 15 or 20 minutes, that many people.
We fed 600 people out at the tobacco barn one time. I guess that's the largest crowd we've ever fed. And I didn't know anything about preparing food, but my wife was a dietitian, and she knew about the food. We had a very active young adult fellowship here at the church, and we didn't have any money, but we had a lot of back, a lot of muscle, I guess, to do things with.
Joe Harden was the one that took the Buddy Liner Fund.
Right.
Started the Buddy Liner Fund.
I was a crew member on a B-29 bomber during the Korean War, and my mother had written me a letter telling me that the church was preparing for a fundraiser to build this educational wing that I'm standing in now. And I was impressed with that, and I decided to send a check for $45 toward that drive. And Dr. Joe Harden took that $45 and converted it into crisp $1 bills and handed it out to the congregation for them to do all sorts of projects that they so desired. And as they took those $1 bills, and when they finished the project that they were assigned to, then they turned around and gave them back to him, and he gave them to other members, and they were fortunate enough to raise over $3,000. I then, about 2 months later, sent another check for $100 and made the statement in there that if people could only see the horrors of war, they would be more than happy to contribute to a project where they can worship freely.
You asked about Ray. He was a good one too. He headed up the egg hunt for years and years and years. I tried to find out for sure how many, but he must have started in the 50s and went through the 60s and 70s, I know, because it was many, many years. And all the kids would bring their eggs, a dozen per child, and Ray'd get his crew of young people, and they'd go out, hide the eggs. We hid at different places before we finally landed at the Mayfields.
The Easter egg hunt's been here 48 years.
The children all seem to love coming to the Easter egg hunt, but it seems to be important in the lives of these children, and we're really on the 3rd generation now, Easter egg hunts.
Well, tell us about Bob.
Oh, well, you know, Bob was special. He was a talented musician and played the piano so well. But he played for funerals, revivals, played in church service, Sunday school. In fact, he played the piano for the home service class. I wish I knew how many years, but it's been long, many years. And of course, then he hooked me in to try to lead the singing, and I'm still doing that. Through the years, many new and wonderful members have been added, but only 5 of the original members are left, I think, which is Betty Moody, Edith Buttram, and me, Ruth Miller, and Maggie and Neil Insminger. And you know, we have wonderful, wonderful memories of our work in the church and working for the Lord.
Behind me, you see what has come to be known the Mayfield's parking lot. It was given to the church by the Mayfield Dairy Farms. At the same time, they gave a portion of the property to the Living Heritage Museum. It was the old McMinn County High School property that was acquired by Mayfield Dairy Farms when the high school was rebuilt at a different location. The sanctuary site behind me was constructed in 1949 after the old church burned downtown. We started services here in September of that year. The 4 columns out front signify the 4 buildings of the church, 3 that were built downtown and then the one on this side. The building behind me is known now as the old educational building, but in 1954 it was brand spanking new. When Joe Harden was here as the pastor in 1952, the decision was made to construct this educational building on Judge R.A. Davis's house lot. Tom Sherman gave the money to construct the outside walls. my folks, Frank and Edith Buttram, decided that they would give the flooring for the upstairs, and through a lot of hard work by other members of this congregation, this building was completed in 1954. Okay, this building behind me is come to known as the new educational building. It was built in 1963. When Gordon Sturkey was here as pastor, he was very excited about developing a stronger youth program. It contains an activity center. It's a fancy title for gym. A lot of elementary age classrooms, Sunday school classrooms. As I mentioned, Gordon Sturkey was very interested in youth program here at the church. While a youth here at this church, I was fortunate to participate with many other young men and women my age on a trip that Gordon organized to New York for small town Athens young people to visit the big city of New York and be able to go to Broadway and see My Fair Lady on Broadway, to see the Yankees play in Yankee Stadium, to eat at Caesar's restaurant, to go to Coney Island and ride the roller coasters there. It was quite an event. Would not have been made possible had it not been for Gordon Sturkey. In order to construct the new educational building behind me in 1963, there was a house there that belonged to the Cochran family that had to be purchased and torn down and to enable us to build this particular facility. Also, 2 more houses were acquired to furnish our parking lot here, and they belonged to the Ferguson family and also the W.W. Grant, Dr. W.W. Grant, who was a dentist here in town. And those 2 houses were purchased for our parking lot. We're now in the block behind the church, which consists of our playground area that you see behind me. And some nice additions have been made through the generosity of Dixie Liner, who gave us the play gym set up there, which was a very nice gift. We're now at the entrance to the Fred Robinson Memorial Prayer Garden. Monies were given to the church in memory of Fred Robinson, who was a past chairman of the trustees here at this church. We're here at what is known as the Martin Hall parking lot. Monies was given to the church by Hughes Martin, in memory of Hughes Martin, by his widow, Irene, and also monies from the Arta Hall estate so that we might concrete this facility here. The house that was standing here before the parking lot was built was the Kiker family. The building behind me, or the portion of the building behind me, is our music wing, and it is constructed on the site where the Ramey House stood here for our church.
The church had the CAB class. It was operated and taught by Dr. C.A. Beard, retired Methodist minister of the M.E. Church South. And this was an era of big Sunday school classes. One Easter Sunday morning, Dr. Beard's class, the CAB class, told some 250 men and boys of youth in there. You can imagine that class. Today we have numerous active classes and they are doing wonders. But as you would know, you wouldn't have a big class like that. But we had a class that acted in proportion to the same way with the home service class, which was a large class and still is a large class, having fine membership and support of projects that it moves along.
Mr. Ansminger was a legend in his time back 50 years ago. And being the radio station and the newspaper were joined together, and I was managing the radio station as we prepared to come on the air. We felt that the first voice should be that of J. Neil Ansminger, the notorious Sunday school teacher and editor and so forth. So we asked Neil if he would be the first voice. So we put him on the air May 1946, and we haven't been able to get him off yet.
A difficult time in the history of Athens, Tennessee, was a period right after World War II. You have heard referred to on time and time again, maybe the Battle of Athens. Young men came back and had a philosophy for this election. Your ballot will be counted as cast. And that's all they wanted to promise people, that it would be a real fair election. We had a preacher at Keith Church. His name was Bernie Hampton. Reverend Bernie Hampton was a pacifist, a real pacifist. To the point that when he was preaching during the war, I've heard him more than one occasion say, I'd rather see my son in a concentration camp than to see him fighting for his country. Now, it wouldn't surprise you, I wouldn't think, to see, as we saw, 3 and 4 families just get up and leave the church because it just did not fit in to when they had a young man in service. But this same gentleman with this attitude took charge of how the GIs handled after the battle and getting it settled. Frank Buttram and Bernie Hampton at the courthouse going into the meeting there. You couldn't go in with a rifle, your firearm. You had to leave them outside, and they did, the two of them saw that was done. And it's by the courage of Bernie Hampton and Frank Buttram and others. I could name a lot of names, but I've got to stop with those two. Those are Keith members that were really involved. But this gentleman, I think, is probably responsible for the fact that it quietened down and got some organization and an unofficial body that would be running the county until something could be done.
In the days of integration, when in some areas there was great bitterness, and where there was not always the compatibility and the hopefulness that was needed, it didn't happen in our community. And one of the strong forces of bringing integration peacefully into the friendly city of Athens and to this community took place in the conference room of Keith Memorial United Methodist Church. Over prayer and working together helped form plans and steps to have a peaceful integration, and it did.
One of the most vital parts of any church is its women's organization. And this was true in the Athens Methodist Episcopal Church South. In the 1800s, the church divided, the Methodist church divided, as the nation did. And this church was known as the Athens Methodist Episcopal Church South. And there were two women's organizations, the Women's Foreign Missionary Society and the Women's Parsonage and Home Society. In 1939, the church reunited. At that time, they changed the Foreign Missionary Society and the Home Missionary Society to the WSCS. At that time, in 1940, there was a WSCS formed in our church. Mrs. Alexander Hume Keith and Mrs. T.J. Gibson were presidents of the two societies which later formed to become the WSCS. There were 38 members in the society at the time. In 1947, the church burned, and WSCS went into high gear to help make money to pay for a new church. At the time, the Wesleyan Service Guild was also formed, and that was a group for business and professional women who could not attend meetings during the day. They were a separate part. They were not part of the WSCS, and they had their own projects, elected their own officers, but the two groups did cooperate in any needs of the church. In 1968, the Methodist Church went with the Evangelical United Brethren Church, and we became the United Methodist Church at that time. In 1971, the church decided that the concerns of women were different. So many women were employed outside the home, and there needed to be a change in the women's society. And this needed to be done, they said, by December 31st, 1973. At that time, we became the United Methodist Women. Lynn Usry headed up a committee to do Chrismon trees.
Chrismon comes from the name Christ and monogram, and are symbols of Christianity from its earliest days. The Wesley Service Guild and the Women's Society of Christian Service were looking for a project that would help unify the circles and help with the transition period. Knowing how much the Chrismon trees had meant to my family, I decided that I would suggest that, and thankfully it was accepted by the circles. Each circle had a representative on the Chrismon committee. Sally Ely, Barbara Walker, Elaine Cathcart, Elizabeth Gwynn, Art Hall, Evelyn Austin, Mary Shadow, Judy Cathcart, and myself served on this committee. When we first started the Chrismon tree project, we wanted to have it done in December of 1973. We finally did get all the Chrismons done, luckily, for the first Advent, and it was a much pride and satisfaction for everyone who worked on it to see those first Chrismon trees.
This is the hand of God. In the Bible, there are more than 100 references to the hand of God. As you will notice that the hand and the fingers are pointing down. This is frequently a sign that of blessing. The second ornament that I have chosen is the descending dove. And the descending dove is one of the most authentic symbols of the Holy Spirit. It is based on the account of the baptism of our Lord. And you'll notice that the dove is pointing downward. The third ornament that I've chosen is the crown of thorns. And this was one of my favorites in that it symbolizes the crucifixion and the suffering of our Lord.
I feel like that it brought the circles together. We accomplished what we wanted to. But it also brought, I think, the church together.
That worked so well in uniting all the various groups of the church. And we were the first church in this area to have the Chrismon trees.
This is Tennessee Treasury of Treats, the original Keith cookbook. It was the brainchild of what is now the United Methodist Women. It was the most financially successful and longest running project that the church has ever had.
This is a lace
And
print.
this one is the last one. And it's a loose leaf one. And really, it holds together better than the old one with that backing on it. But this is something that the whole church participated in, all the circles.
And I believe
took
they
them.
say that we made $20,000 off of this book.
Cookbook Committee was made up of co-chairman Ava Dodson and Lois Owen, and the members of this committee were Nina Blair, Helen Miller, Dana Higgins, Jane Boyd, Joan Johnson, Tolie Walker, Mildred Sullins, Evelyn Evans, and myself. Buddy Biddle did the cover and the artwork for us. The book was dedicated to the youth of our church and city, and the proceeds helped provide facilities for our youth, furnished the ladies' parlor, and did the first kitchen that the Keith Church ever had, as well as many other things. This book was really a treasury of Tennessee treats.
Keith Church is woven through the Mayfield family, starting with Thomas Brummett Mayfield in 1897. He is in the directory. He was my great-grandfather. In 1913, Thomas Bryant Mayfield, his son, was in the directory. His wife, Goldie Denton Mayfield, had the pleasure and the pride of doing Keith Church flowers for 7 consecutive years in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Some of my fondest memories of her when I was growing up is when I would spend the night with her and she would be messing with the flowers on Saturday and planning what she was going to do, and we would come to the church and she would do the finishing touches. All the flowers in her garden she did and planned so that she would have continuous flowers throughout all year round. She would get so excited when she would find something that would bloom at a different time, and she took great pride in doing the flowers at Keith Church for those 7 years. Buddy Biddle says that one day when he started doing the flowers at the church, that she would say, she came up to him after and said, "That flower's out of place." And he said, "Well, it won't grow right." And she says, "Well, after I put them in the church, I never look at them again." But she really had great pride in doing the flowers for Keith Church.
We had several people who dreamed of a written history of this church. Miss Louise Keith was the first one who wanted to record the history of this church. She had certain notes that she had taken over the years. She passed those notes to Miss Susie Williams, who added her own research notes. Then in 1960, Liv Sturkey, in her Sunday school class, did a written history that is several pages long in that directory. And to my knowledge, that was the first written history of this church. Methodism in America celebrated its bicentennial in 1984, and churches were asked to record their history. We had a fine lady from this church, Mrs. Marinelle Graves, who determined that this history book should come about. She recruited me to work with her and her nephew, Fred Saussman, and we researched with the committee the history of this church, and this book was published in 1985, and it was my pleasure to work with her. I do not think we would ever have had a written history of this church had it not been for Marinelle Graves.
Keith Church has been blessed with many wonderful parsonage families, and always it is a joint effort, for a man cannot be a minister or a woman without the support of their families. But the one I want to tell you about today is Elizabeth Sturkey, who was known to our congregation as Lib. She came here in June of 1958 with her husband. There were 2 or 3 things that she did that I feel need to be remembered by the church. One of them, she started the Aldersgate class, and this ministered to drew on the young couples in the church who were not involved in the Sunday school. She taught them about church history, and she even wrote a church history of Keith Church. I don't know that it was the first one, but it was one that was certainly a valuable one for us. And she made us aware of our heritage in this church. The first Christmas that they were here, she sold her circle on the idea we should have a living nativity scene on the front lawns. So the circle made the costumes for this. And for 2 weekends and the time in between before Christmas, members of the church stood every night to present this tableau to the community. And it meant so much to the community and to those who stood there that that custom continues to this day. And she always served graciously. I never knew her to complain about anything that she did for the church. The church Sturkeys were our pastoral family for 6 wonderful years. And I can truthfully say that I was inspired by Lib and encouraged in my own spiritual growth for as long as I was able to be with her. She was a person that I really felt tried as hard as anybody to live the life that Jesus would have had her live. And she inspired others of us to do likewise.
One of the big things that I remember of this church was the living nativity scene, which was started with Lib and Gordon Sturkey when they came in 1958, and when they left in '64, my mother took over the responsibility of getting the nativity scene put up and getting the people to stand. I think it's a community event that people come by. Of course, now they come to see the live animals. We started out with no animals, and we had some animals cut out of wood and painted, and then we went to live animals that we have now, and I think the animals are as much a draw as anything. Mother worked with the living nativity scene for approximately 25 years until she had her stroke, and then still took it upon her responsibility to make sure that it was done the way it had been done for years and years and years. For many years, Mother was the one who, when the pictures went to the DPA, she was the one who was supposed to know everybody that was a member of the church and then cut their pictures out and put them on the bulletin board, the community bulletin board, so that when you were faces in the news, when your picture was in the paper, your picture was also on the board here at Keith.
We joined Keith Methodist Church on August the 8th, 1948, while we were having the church, as I said, up in the high school. And my wife has been very active in the Keith Methodist Church ever since we have joined the church and lived here. She was president of Keith United Methodist Women in 1950 and 51. And because of her inspiration to a lot of the young ladies in the church, they formed a circle and named it the Dana Higgins Circle. And she had appreciated this all these many years. Dana was named Woman of the Year at Keith Methodist Church in 1982. And she was named Woman of Distinction at Keith Church in 1983. Keith Memorial United Methodist Church presented Dana with the Faithful Friend Award in April of 1998 in appreciation for her commitment, dedication, and faithfulness to the congregation throughout the years that she had been a member. Dana has worked in contact, and also she worked in Meals on Wheels, which was delivering people food that were not able to go out and get food and lived alone in many occasions. And one thing I had almost forgotten, she made these large Christmas candles and sold them to people to raise money for the Buddy Liner Fund, which was later used to build the first educational building at Keith Memorial Methodist Church. And the city has also recognized Dana as an outstanding citizen when she was given the Vivid Award. And Dana had also taught a children's Sunday school class, and she also worked in the Brownies and the Girl Scouts. She always sent anniversary and birthday cards to church members. The names would come out in the Keeping Up with Keith bulletin, and of course Dana would take that list and always mail every one of them a card that same week. People that were homebound and maybe lived alone, she would take them a poinsettia at Christmas time. Not only has Dana been recognized by the church, but Tennessee Wesleyan College has also recognized Dana for things that she has done. She was awarded the Harry Stedman Award. Then also Tennessee Wesleyan College awarded her the Mary Mildred Sullivan Award, which was awarded to an individual who, by their general conduct and their relationship to others, indicate they possess a marked degree of spirited helpfulness and awareness of the beauty and value of intangible elements of life.
In early 1974, while Jimmy Ball was pastor, several factors led to discussions regarding the refurbishing of the sanctuary. Namely, these factors were that the sanctuary was in real need of major repairs, as none had been done since 1949. Beautiful stained glass windows for the entire nave, a gift of Catherine Keith, were put in 1973. And the church needed a new organ. A committee was formed to oversee planned redecorations, needed repairs, and the purchase of the new organ. The committee consisted of the following members: Paul Walker, chairman; George Usry, Kenneth Higgins, Catherine Keith, William R. Selden, Fred Robinson, William E. Forey, Jewel Humbert Sturkey, Barbara Walker, and Jean Aarons. At the suggestion of Dr. Trotter, the committee contacted the L.L. Sands Company out of Waco, Texas, who specialized in church renovation. And they came to Athens and met with the members of the church more than once. They guaranteed that we would be out of the sanctuary for 6 weeks, which we were. We met in the gymnasium and had the altar under the basketball goal. The total cost of all the work that was done was $149,111, which is hard to believe now.
I was chairman of the building committee when we rebuilt some of the church in 1992. We're currently in the sanctuary, and I'm standing in the so-called choir pit. It was from this point at the end of this support and beam that we added on, going back into the sanctuary to add some to create additional choir loft and space for the instruments. And then behind us, back behind the stained glass, was what we call the music suite, where we added choir rooms, some Sunday school rooms, and the handbell choir room that we could use for future use and to tie into the sanctuary. Also, as part of that major building program, we did some renovations to the sanctuary itself. We're now standing in front of the church where the main offices are. This is the dedication plaque that was used to dedicate the building on June 1st, 1997, after all the major work we started in 1992. The section we're in front of used to be a driveway between the two major sections to the church, and we utilized this space to eliminate that driveway and build offices, a library, and to build Sunday school classrooms on the second floor. This tied all the different buildings of the facility together so that you can go through the church from one end to the other and stay inside for the whole time. We're now in the last section of the renovation for the major renovation program we did in 1992 at Keith's Church. This is the youth addition that we added onto the back of the gym. As you can see behind me, some of the youth are here and have been working. This was one of the major renovations we did and one of the major sections we added so that we could work with youth and have some additional space for them to have activities and do things and serve as Sunday school rooms.
Well, it was a good day for me when Russ Humbert, my husband, and I first came to Keith Church. The old church building had burned at Christmas time in 1947, and we came in 48. So the congregation was gathering in the high school auditorium, which is across the street from the present building. The building was just cavernous, and there were these dark seats, part of them filled. The ones that were filled were rickety and noisy, and an old upright piano stood in the corner next to the stage. Neil Linsminger stood up and said, "Well, we don't have anybody to play today. Would anybody here be able to play the piano?" So before anybody else could speak, I said, "Oh, I will." I hadn't been near a piano for several years then, and I was just delighted to get to play. Some of the members of the choir during those early days were Harry and Mary Elizabeth Johnson, Elizabeth Gwynn, Ruth and Bob Miller, Betty Moody, Bill Selden, Edith Buttram, Isabel Eves. The first youth choir that I remember was under the direction of John Osborne, who also directed the adult choir. Other directors of youth choirs were Alan Mitchell, Rob Countryman, who was a TWC student and attracted lots of the young girls, Linda Lovelace, and Linda McGill. Children's choirs that I played for were directed by Lucy Connor and Laurel Jordan and Susan Buttram.
I joined the church in 1959, and I had the privilege of serving on the music committee in 1968 when Lynn was hired, Lynn McGill, and of course we hired Linda at the same time. She came with him, and at that point we started a graduated choir program under the tutelage of Sue Trotter and Lynn McGill. They both were most supportive and encouraged us to do this. So, as a mother of 2 young children, I started playing for the Charles Wesley Singers, and Linda directed them. And then as the children got older, my children got older, we expanded another choir, and it became the Philip Audubon Choir. And we worked with them for a couple of years.
And as we moved up, we added new people on. Judy Sullins took over the Charles Wesley Singers when Khaki and I moved up. And then when we moved up to the youth choir, Laurel Jordan, who was an active member of our church choir and a really neat girl, took over Philip Audubon choristers, and she directed those until her family moved, and then Susan Buttram did that choir for quite a few years. And we had started a handbell program in 1981, and so in 82 when I came on board, I tried to keep that going, and then that has later become the work of Larry Cantrell, local attorney who does our adult handbells. And about 94 or 95, we added some hand chimes, and I work with youngsters with the hand chimes. About 5 or 6 years ago, we added a tenebrae service during Holy Week, a service of shadows, which is by far the choir's favorite service of all the ones we do. 2 years ago, we added a Seder meal to Holy Week and used the ensemble there. The Keith Ensemble was started by me in 1984. Our chancel choir has sung for the inaugural for James Dawson when he was inaugurated president of TWC. We were part of the program for the TWC kickoff for fundraising this past year. This is a group of people who love to sing, and more than that, they love each other. It truly is an extended family, and we have all, we're all so close. We've been together so long. Some people that Jewel named at the beginning of this segment were in this choir for 50 or more years. In 1985, we added one other service that has become for many people the favorite service here, and that's the hanging of the greens. This church continues to support the music program, as it has through all the years. I've been here 31 years now. It seems like yesterday when we came. And yet the church has always looked upon the music program as one of the integral parts of mission of this church. And the musicians look at it that way too.
And in watching those years and the people in the outreach of the church, it is simply astounding and amazing at how many projects that there are where much of the leadership is provided by Keith Church people in the field of education. How many of our people have served in leadership capacity of the chairmanship of boards and the operations, the library, the museum, habitat, all of the various projects, the Home of Hope, one of the strong members of the first governing body, and by the way, the county manager form of government in McMinn County was the initial type of that government in the state of Tennessee. And one of the 9 members of that first county council was Dr. W.D. Sullins, a long-time strong and influential member in Keith Memorial Church. So you see, we have had an outreach till this very day.
Keith Church has always been interested in our hosting conference Methodist colleges, Emory and Henry, Hiawassee, and particularly Tennessee Wesleyan College, being it's located here in Athens. If you look at the membership of Keith Church, you'll find a lot of them are graduates of Tennessee Wesleyan College. If you look in our business and professional community, you'll find a lot of them are graduates of Tennessee Wesleyan College. If you look at the people who are annual contributors to keeping Tennessee Wesleyan going with financial gifts, you will find a lot of Keith members that are giving in this program. A number of years ago, approximately 1978, when Bob Walker was our minister, several of us were interested in trying to establish a program through the church in which we would attempt to encourage members of our church to go to Tennessee Wesleyan College. And by doing this, we set up a scholarship program. We started out at $5,000 in the fund, and we had where each student that attended would get a $500 scholarship to try to encourage them to go to Wesleyan. This program has gone on every year since then. Now in our budget is $6,000, and we have it up to where they will be $1,000 allotted to a student if they attend Tennessee Wesleyan. If you look at the leaders at Tennessee Wesleyan, over the years, a lot of our members have served as members of the alumni board or on the trustees. At the present time, Regina Mayfield, Kenneth Higgins, Bill Sullins, and Kerry Davis are trustees of Tennessee Wesleyan, and Earl Henley is an honorary member. So you can see that Wesleyan and Keith Church go hand in hand, and we're proud to be a part of this.
I know the first time we delivered anything, from which it did evolve into the Friendly Fellow Club, but there were 6 baskets left over, and we put them in the back of Frank's car, and we went around and delivered what they had in there. And it was a wonderful feeling when you would see those children. They were just so thrilled to get a new doll or a ball or top or just most anything. And then they always had fruit for them, and usually a little candy at my suggestion, because that's something everybody likes, I think. But then it grew and grew and grew until Edith and I couldn't keep up with the names anymore.
It outgrew what the church could do or the young adult class could do, and a formal organization was formed in 1956. The primary focus has been Christmas baskets for those in need around the holiday season. Of course, everything is funded by contributions through the community. There's no administrative cost whatsoever. Every penny that is received goes to the members of our community. It has gone from a high of over 1,200 baskets to a low of about 500 baskets. Approximately 15 years ago, the Optimist Club semi-adopted the program.
And when I was asked to join the Optimist Club, I would only do it under one condition, that they would agree to sell the newspapers. And to hold them to that, I wouldn't join the club till after they sold them that first year. And that was 15 years ago, and they've been doing it ever since.
Also, the physicians at the Athens Medical Group, each year in flu season, they give free flu shots in lieu of a contribution to the Friend and Fellow Club. We started off with about 200 shots and about $1,200 received, and now we're up to about 700 shots and close to $4,000. And this has been a great help to us.
The Youth Service Fund
is money that is raised by United Methodist Youth and is a fund that does not stay at any church. The money goes to the United Methodist Church and is spent on needy youth throughout the United States.
I helped start the Sunshine Patch, and that was in 1987. We started out with 3 children, and we were expecting 25 that day, and by the end of the second week we had about 30. It was a very exciting time at Keith Church. It was a community outreach mission. Dan Kelly had asked me if I would help start this, and I did, and I feel like it was a very excellent program. Some of the activities involved here, we took them skating each year, and we tried to get them back in the community and talking about church and talking about good things that could be happening in their lives. And we felt like that if one life was touched or one life was helped, that it was worthwhile.
I've always been very proud of Keith Church's mission program because we have had a good outreach type program.
Well, my part in missions at Keith Church started in '86. Dan Kelly called me and said he needed a veterinarian to go to the Caribbean with him on a mission trip to Dominica. Hurricane David had come through and torn up a school on the island of Dominica, and it was a St. Andrew's school, and St. Andrew's school had a farm, and I went to help them with the farm animals.
Mildred and Doc saw an average, I would say, of 100 people a day looking for glasses, and he never turned anybody away. Dale and Becky Kennedy went on the first trip, and Dale averaged between 30 and 40 patients a day, and most of what he was doing was filling teeth and pulling teeth.
I often wondered when we were sending 12 to 15 people, spending that much money, what we really were doing. Were we wasting money just for a trip? And while we were down there at one time, we were told that our presence was more important. If we took the time to come and help them do what they wanted, then we were doing a great deal of service to that group of people.
Another hurricane came through in South Carolina. St. John's Island was destroyed by hurricane, I'm thinking it was Hurricane Andrew. And so the youth group went to help rebuild. I would say in the 90s we did more in-home evangelism and in-home missions than we did foreign missions together. Although every time that I asked Keith Church to help me go somewhere, they always helped me go. I'd say in the 93, I decided to go to the Philippines, and they helped me go to that. We've started a livestock project there with Heifer Project International, and Keith Church has been the biggest contributor to that livestock project.
Keith has had a tremendous influence on Habitat for Humanity in all ways, not just the founding of it, but in the financing, especially in the financing of all the churches, and we've had great support from the churches throughout the county. Keith has been the leader. In fact, on Sunday morning when I look up in the choir, you know, I see singers up there, but I see a carpet layer, I see a plumber, I see a painter, I see people who have donated things to us, I see people who have made meals and brought out to the work site. I look across the aisle and I see an electrician that has donated literally hundreds of hours. You know, I guess I just have to say that as a member of Keith Memorial United Methodist Church, I am tickled to death to see the commitment that this church has made to the Habitat for Humanity of McMinn County.
One of the projects that we tried to raise money for was a drawing that I did of Keith Church, and that was done in '81, and we have sold pictures since then, and we do place all the money that we sell from this to the mission program.
The Thanksgiving Meal Project started in 1988 under the leadership of Francis Klein and Joan Cliff.
Joan Cliff was the chairman of the project. They decided to serve, just ask people to come in and eat with the church members here in the church, and did this for 2 years. We moved over to the other kitchen and decided to try to make it a bigger project by going out into the community and putting signs up, letting people know that if they were homebound, that we would deliver to them instead of having people come into the church. We still had reservations for people who wanted to eat in the church. The first year we had 75 people who signed up to come in and eat, and by the next year it had grown to 170. And by the last year we served, the amount had grown to 300.
The Meals on Wheels do not deliver on holidays, and so we get a lot of our referrals from the Meals on Wheels list or from home health care agencies. We also advertise in the newspaper and the radio, and folks, can call and make reservations from that. We also have people that just happen by and come in, and we welcome anybody that wants to come and join us.
In many of the deliveries we make, we receive such a blessing from this because of the meaningful experience that it is in visiting in the home of these folks. They are so very appreciative of this small token that we're able to give to them this way.
The UMW Salad Luncheon was begun in the mid-1970s with Margaret Dilbeck serving as the first chairman. And she says she was assisted by Buddy Biddle. Very proud of that, and Buddy still assists us to this day in serving the UMW luncheon.
It started out as a small serving with around 200 people, and it's grown, and today we serve about 700 people. And it's become an event that the community looks forward to and knows about and anticipates, so we usually sell out. We don't have too much trouble selling tickets. The money is used for several things. It's really the only fundraiser that UMW has, and the money goes to several different functions that the church or that Holston Conference sponsor, like camps and Holston Home, coordinated charities locally.
As well as Habitat for Humanity building and coordinated charities. I think you said that one, but the Christmas basket is put on every year, and just lots of local things. Anything that there's a need for, then the people come to UMW for financing, and we try to meet all the needs that we can.
They started as a play group several years ago, and out of that grew the Parents' Day Out program, which started as Mother's Day Out. I think we just started 1 or 2 days a week, and now we're up to 3 4-year-old classes and 1 3-year-old class, and they come 2 days a week for the Parents' Day Out. And out of that program grew our preschool program, and we have 3 4-year-old classes and 2 3-year-old classes. So 5 days a week there are young children here at Keith learning and growing and just having a great time and adding a lot to our community.
The outreach that Keith has, that it is not just confined to a Sunday morning worship or a period of prayer meeting or a fellowship dinner. They are at work outside on their everyday lives, in their everyday services, in the work where they earn a livelihood and things to make this the friendly city and a good living place. And a great deal of it lies at the doorstep of the people of Keith Memorial United Methodist Church. You can see it for yourself.
The premise of the Shepherd Ministry is that each member is prayed for every day by someone in the church, because we truly believe that our prayers for our members is the most important gift that we can give them. Also, that each member is contacted at least once a month to be reminded that there is someone in the church praying for them and to ask for prayer requests. And then each shepherd comes to a quarterly meeting where we share and discuss things about the shepherd ministry. And if one of the sheep are having a problem, then it's the shepherd's responsibility to be sure and contact the church to be certain that the pastors know that there's someone who's having a problem so they can minister to them. This has been going on now for 2 years, and we're about to enter our 3rd year beginning in September, and I think that it's been a real blessing to everyone in the church.
The Altar Guild was formed, I think George Harr was the minister here. I distinctly know that Arthur Jones was the minister at Trinity Church, and Arthur was probably the most knowledgeable of church ritual that we had in Holston Conference. And Mary Elizabeth was working with him and actually set up what is known as the Altar Guild. The duties of the Altar Guild were to keep the lectern and the pulpit and the altar center all in harmony with the church and with the ritual. There was an awful lot of work that went into it, and there were crews of girls who were on that Altar Guild. Their duties were to come in every week, and they polished the brass, and they polished the collection plates. They were to make sure that the paraments were on in the right order, in the right color, and it was no small job. The paraments on the front are seasonal, and they're changed according to the church calendar. They also established the flower committee, which was, I think, part of that Altar Guild.
I do flowers for the Keith Church on Sunday mornings. I do most of the Sundays. They're placed in the church as honor or as in memory of members or members of the family. And people do take each Sunday that's nearest their particular date, and they place them on those dates.
This parsonage was built by the church back in 1954, and the land was donated by the Keith family, so that the parsonage that was by Don's down near the church could be moved up to this location.
Last July, 1998, we began having prayer meetings here in the sanctuary on Wednesday night. I started thinking a lot about Neil Ensminger, and I had heard that he and some of the people from Keith Church had had a prayer meeting for a long time, and so I decided to call him and ask if I could come over and speak with him about prayer meetings and how they conducted theirs and how long it went on, and just to find out a little bit, because anything that Neil did, I know was done right, and if we could just mimic anything he did, I knew that it would be fine. He said that in years past, prayer meeting had been so large that they had decided to break up into these prayer cells, which they called cottage prayer meetings, into groups of about 10 and start meeting in various people's homes, so you didn't lose the intimacy of the prayer meeting. And the one that met at his home had met for over 30 years. They had decided to disband their prayer meeting in March of last year, which is exactly the same time I started waking up in the night knowing we needed to have a prayer meeting. So when he said that, I told him, I said, well, I guess God didn't want Keith Church to go without a prayer meeting.
The corner class members participate in various services for the church. Some of the members check the pews every Sunday to see if there's anything left over that needs to be thrown away, sharpening pencils, things like that. One of the guys is an usher fairly frequently on Sunday mornings. One of the guys helps in the nursery when he can. The guys usually set up for the Thanksgiving meal. They put the prayer stickers on the boxes for the takeout meals for the Thanksgiving meal. They serve the church in any way that they can, and there's lots of ways that they can serve. Every year, Camp Lookout, which is in the Holston Conference, provides a celebration camp for the clients that are developmentally delayed. And this year, 23 clients will be going from this area to Camp Lookout. Keith Church provides camperships or scholarships every year and has been very supportive in this program.
From 1977 to 1985, I was a camper, later a counselor at Camp Lookout, and during that time Keith Youth sent more youth as campers, and then later on some as counselors during those years. And Camp Lookout is located on top of Lookout Mountain in Rising Fawn, Georgia. Also with one-to-one camp, where you would have an underprivileged child from probably inner city Chattanooga be matched up with a counselor. Keith would send camperships, like a scholarship, so that the counselors could go. And Buddy Biddle, for many years, would give camperships, multiple camperships to Keith Youth to be counselors.
The Epworth League, one of the first youth organizations, was established in the Holston Conference 6 years after it was founded, in 1889. With the merger of the Southern and Northern churches in 1939, the youth program took on a new name, the Methodist Youth Fellowship, or the MYF. In 1968, the MYF became the UMYF, which stands for United Methodist Youth Fellowship, which is still the name today.
It's a huge event, and I think it's a good event, not only for other churches, but for our churches to draw youth from the surrounding area to go, because, you know, I bet, since I remember going, I bet probably half of the youth that went weren't from our church. Mm-hmm. So it's just a good tool for the churches to reach out to other youth within their areas and get them to go.
We also have kids that aren't in our youth group that are members of the church but do not attend our youth group regularly, and they always make it a point to not miss resurrection sign up. So it's a good time too for us as a group to be able to bond and reach out to them, and sometimes it gets them to come to youth, you know, after we go to resurrection.
Yeah, I think it's become a really fun tradition to look forward to resurrection. You can always go there and see people that you saw last year, and, you know, try to stay in touch with them. You make a whole lot of friends from, you know, the surrounding area and other churches. There's a lot of connections there.
One of the things about resurrection that means a lot to me, I guess, are the speakers. They've had some really great speakers there, from one guy who'd come on stage and have us all yell back at him about the main thing, and the guy this year who handed out cans of Spam before he started talking. These speakers are great guys.
That was a really memorable event, to be serving communion to all these thousands and thousands of youth.
In the year that they ran out of bread, or the bread part, and they served Twinkies and crackers and whatever they could find, because they didn't plan according to the crowd evidently, and they ran out of communion elements, but they were like, well, God doesn't care, and that's okay. Whatever, it's what it symbolizes that we need to keep in mind.
During the time that Sam Barnell was our minister, they began to have acolytes to light candles during the evening worship service. During 1971, a more structured acolyte program was begun, which consisted of formal training, wearing of robes, and participating in other parts of our worship service. After several years of only using boys, girls began to serve. The acolyte program has been a very meaningful part of our worship service, and also a very meaningful part of the boys and girls who have served.
I've been associated with the troop for a little over 20 years. Our troop here has been sponsored since 1956 by the church and has a very rich tradition. Some of our older members of the church served as scoutmasters way back when, and including Jewel Duke and John Woods. Charlie McGinnis was an early scoutmaster, as well as Eugene Hill. In recent years, Scotty Mayfield, when he graduated from college, took over the troop from John Miller, who is also a member of the church, and he led the Scouts for well over 10 years. And during his regime in the 70s and early 80s, the troop really blossomed. We have 70 Scouts who have made the rank of Eagle over the years, and we have an additional 2 right now who are working on it. Our troop has been involved with many different activities, including scouting for food, working with the church on particular activities, helping with the library, moving books. Over the years have been many goodwill projects that either boys working on their Eagle or a troop as a whole have been involved with. Keith Church has been our sponsor continuously through this period, and their moral support and their financial support and the support with having leadership supplied has made a great big difference in the ability of the troop to survive the normal ups and downs that occur in the scouting movement. Under Dan Herron, who is taking over now, we are looking forward to continuing in a rich tradition, and we have a lot of new boys coming in this fall, and we're looking forward to working with them and going forward and doing the things that Scouts like to do.
I'm Jim Dodson. I'd like to share with you just a little bit about our church transportation. In 1978, the church bought its first van. And then in 1988, they added a 1988 minibus. We currently have a 15-passenger 1991 van, and then this 25-passenger bus that you see behind us here. The vehicles are used for many different activities of the church. Our children and youth, as well as our adult daycare, use the vehicles in their activities. And then our adults use it in many ways. We have Marvelous Monday and another group of adults, the prime timers, that use it quite extensively for day trips. And then in addition to that, we use our vehicles for a 5 or 6 day trip each fall and each spring. I feel that by providing safe transportation is another thing that the Keith Church does to provide and add more meaning to our lives.
A group known as Friends Unlimited began on March 21st, 1973 with Reverend Jimmy Ball, his wife Betty, and Keith members Vernon Minnick, Mrs. W.A. Shatta, and Mrs. Jessie Jones being in charge of a potluck luncheon. Mr. Minnick was elected chairman, and this group remained active under his leadership for a number of years. Friends Unlimited was later known as Marvelous Monday, which is made up of older adults that meet the first Monday of each month to make some type of interesting trip, which must always include a nice lunch. The Marvelous Monday group travels in the church bus with our associate minister, Stuart Havey, driving. A trip across the newly opened Shaharla Skyway with a picnic lunch along the way, a lunch at a small restaurant, and a visit to Sequoia Birthplace Museum, or a trip to the Knoxville Convention Center for the Kroger-sponsored Senior Days are examples of the activities that the Marvelous Monday group enjoy.
have been secretary for 25 years this past May. This has been an enjoyable 25 years.
I'm the business administrator. Been here 5 years, I think. And I just take care of the finances for the church and the Child Development Center and payroll, anything that has to do with the money, contributions.
I've been here 22 years, and I like to work here, and I love them all.
I think the challenges before us in the future are many. I think we need to continue to serve as leaders in our community. We need to continue to be active and at work in our neighborhood where there is still a great deal of need, a great deal of people who are struggling and hurting. We need to be able to be channels of God's love and hope and peace. We also need to understand that our neighborhood does not just consist of Athens, Tennessee, but essentially reaches out to all of the world. I hope that we can expand our witness and our mission, not just by giving of our gifts, but by giving of our energy and of our talents, serving as God's people in the world. God has blessed this congregation tremendously, but with every blessing comes a responsibility, and we're called to be stewards of God's love and of God's grace, and I have every confidence that as we look to our future, we will continue to do that faithfully and willingly and enthusiastically, and most of all, joyfully, because of the love that we have been given and are invited to share.
Simply let us say that as we look back on the history of Keith's church, and I repeat from where I started, over these years, the 60, the 50, or 175th, or whatever you had, when we come here and see the quarters that we have now, the structure wherein we worship, the people that we worship with, we listen to the music that we enjoy, we hear the Word of God explained, we hear the sounds of the voices of people lifted in prayer and concern and practicing of the Christianity as they see it. We are like that section in the 23rd Psalm. Our cup runneth over. Thank you.